To say very little holds wheelchair basketball player Ryan Martin back would be a serious understatement. Martin learned early in life that the combination of talent and having a hard work ethic make a winning combination. Welcome, Ryan.
Oh, thank you for having me. Looking forward to this interview.
Hey Ryan, let's get right into it. I did a little reading about you, and boy, you grew up in a really interesting family environment. You had some parents who adopted you, and there were a number of other disabled children in the home. Boy, first of all, that must have been very chaotic just all on its own.
Yeah, I think it was a great experience for what I do now, just blending a lot of different personalities and being able to work in groups. But yeah, there was 12 of us, 8 were adopted with, various physical disabilities. And so just a really unique opportunity to kind of, learn some like group dynamics and whatnot.
Do you think in some ways growing up in an environment like that helped to push you forward and create that fierce independence and that motivation that you have that drives you forward?
I think so, and I think my mom was going to kill me otherwise. I mean, I think the dynamic of raising children with disabilities, I think parents, have to kind of prepare them for the harsh realities of what they wait for, and I think my mom did a really good job of, not allowing me to make excuses.
Ryan, you're well educated. You graduated from Southwest Minnesota University. You work as an executive director for your own foundation. You work for CUNY, City University, New York, helping to, create inclusive programs. I mean, you are doing so much with your life. How do you keep up with your schedule alone?
That's a great question. I really have a great team around me. Whether it's at CUNY or whether it's within my foundation. So I have a lot of people that really kind of prop me up and allow me to kind of specialize and do what I do best and kind of take care of that. I think, when I started my nonprofit, I was really young. I was in my early 20s, and the first thing I learned about, kind of leadership is putting smarter people around you, because you're not going to know everything you need to know. And so that's kind of when, I build team dynamics, or when I start new projects, that's always my goal, is to just let the expert be the experts, and, trust the people you hire.
As I started to channel down on some of your accomplishments, the places you've been, the things you've done, I saw that you played basketball over in Europe for 10 seasons, and it seems predominantly sort of in France and Spain. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So, I saw something that really interested me. You said, more or less, I'm paraphrasing, that the one thing I miss about playing in Europe versus the USA is that the fan support was significantly better. Recently, we interviewed Mariska Berger from the Netherlands. She was on the gold medal team to Tokyo. And she talked about playing stateside versus playing over in Europe and the different dynamics. So, I think my question to you is, what you were saying about Europe is that in many ways they've moved forward and they're really interested in the sport. So in your mind, playing for the New York Rolling Knicks, where are we falling short in the United States?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and I get asked a lot, like, why is there a professional model in Europe and there's not a professional model in the U.S.? I just think the governmental buy-in to adaptive sports, in the predominant countries where Germany, Italy, France, Turkey, Spain, is higher, and they found a way to monetize it, and so it's gained interest. I think when you look at like the perspective on disability, and I think an individual with a disability in the U.S. has more opportunities, but I think the professional sporting model better fits into Europe. I feel like in the U.S., we look at adaptive sports as a great thing, but we still view it as a lesser a lesser product than, let's say, able-bodied sports would be. And so I think that's kind of the issue that we have with it is, and it's not to say everything is all peaches and cream in Europe with the professional model, but it does show an example of, a business modality of how to fund adaptive sports, and make it a profitable model and to have a programmatic structure year over year.
So here we are. It seems like such a contradiction. In the United States, we have the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. We've got the accessibility. We have so many other things going for us, and yet we haven't found a way to channel, disabled sports into the mainstream. So basketball being your specialty, I mean, have you considered the possibilities of the ways that this could go? I mean, for example, in my mind, I've always thought, why, if you play for the New York Rolling Knicks, why wouldn't the Knicks or the Pacers or the Lakers, why wouldn't they support a team and maybe do halftime programs with wheelchair basketball? I guess what I'm saying is, does this start way down further, all the way down into the high school, college level? Am I thinking too high to think, would this be a good place to jump off at?
Yeah, so a couple of things in full disclosure. So I'm the vice president of the NWBA, the National Wheelchair Basketball Association. And so I think our amateur model makes a lot of sense for our structure here in the U.S., right? What we're able to do in the U.S. from a model of wheelchair basketball, using that as our example, is we're able to provide that from an early age as a prep level all the way, through a collegiate program model into a D1, D2, D3, and potentially, a Paralympic level model for our elite athletes, right? So we have a holistic scope that in Europe they don't have. Like, in Europe, they tend to kind of use a model kind of like I call it the Luka Doncic model, like where, if you're a 15 or 16-year-old and you're really talented, well, let's put you against a bunch of professionals and let's have you learn this way, where our process is more holistic in the sense of we're trying to develop you from an early age, offer that academic piece, because in the reality of it, adaptive sports isn't going to make anybody's life, financially significant to the point where they're not going to need to do something after the fact, right? So I think our model really works well in the US with the NWBA. But to your point, the idea of where would a professional model fit into the scope and sequence of that, I think we've seen the NBA and the WNBA become great partners of wheelchair basketball on a grassroots level, whether it's the New York Knicks relationship or, my nonprofit works with the Boston Celtics and the Connecticut Sun in different areas as well. But I don't think we've gotten around on a funding modality, and like pro sports needs to generate money, right? And you need to generate money in one of two ways, either, ticket sales or sponsorships, right? And so if we've got this culture where adaptive sports is only relevant during the Paralympic Games because now NBC broadcasts it a great deal, like how do we capitalize on that and then begin to create a structure where it's a financial modality of success, right? Because otherwise you see numerous sports leagues, whether it's lacrosse or a lot of sports generated for like women that go up and go down, right? So how do you build a structure that allows it to maintain and be significant over year?
Hey, so let's talk about that structure, Ryan. About a month ago, I hosted a panel with some really qualified people on the prospect of why the NCAA hasn't gotten to the point where they've allowed the inclusion of scholarship programs that combined athletics with academics. I mean, obviously, disabled people are smart enough to get into programs, but yet they aren't, really hosting, duality programs where they're pushing people forward. And I had, some really qualified people: Darlene Hunter, gold medalist Paralympics; Brad Hedrick; Mike Frogley, coach of Canada; Abu Yila, and we tried to kind of hash out, what exactly was the issue and how is it that we convince the NCAA? Is it a sellable product, Ryan? I mean, do we have something that we could give to the NCAA, and furthermore, after we're in, if we could get into those programs, what's the value for the disabled person to be able to participate in a program like that?
So, awesome question, and you asked me like four questions in one, so I'm going to kind of unpack
I know,
slowly to
I'm
kind of
sorry
get to
about
a.
that.
Yeah, no, it's okay. No, but it's a great question. So first things first, the NCAA does not drive policy. The NCAA governs. So the push isn't the NCAA passing this idea down to the membership. It's the membership going to the NCAA saying we want this to be part of our portfolio. So what you need is you need 35 programs to be considered an emerging sport under the NCAA landscape. You saw a little bit of that, starting to take shape in with e-games and whatnot. So first of all, like working in higher ed, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. So you have to come up with a model that does not deal with inclusion. Higher ed wants to know, how does this financially work and how does this benefit the university? And they don't think about because there's a million programs that could be inclusive, but once again, it's going to be a non-revenue sport. So how do you go to a university and pitch a startup program, right? You have to pitch with business. You have
Of course.
to talk to business people like you talk business. I think a lot of our flaw is we talk about adaptive sports on inclusion and doing the right thing. What we have to understand is higher ed is a business, right? It's education, but it's still business and it's still money, right? And it's an enrollment driven industry. So you have to prove that this is going to be substantial in a sense of enrollment. So now you have students with disabilities, which is a protected class, and it's a diversity student population, right? Which is an attractive thing, but it still needs to make financial sense to a university to incorporate that. So when I talk to individuals who are trying to start programs at different collegiate places, I ask them what is their business plan, and they'll go to and say, hey, well, it's inclusion, it's the right thing to do. And that's all very well and true, right? And that's good. But you have to come up with a financial strategic plan that shows that this is going to add all of those inclusive things to the bucket of the university, right? And it's going to
Right.
be a point of pride for the university. But you also have to show how you're going to fund it, right? And coming out of the pandemic, the last thing a university wants to do is have more non-revenue sports on the docket. And so I think the conversation, if we are to, make a seismic dent and create larger population capacity, needs to be on how do we develop a business model that's duplicatable? Because if you look at the various collegiate programs in the landscape, they're all doing it a little bit differently. Edinburgh is doing it this way. University of Illinois is doing it this way. The SEC schools, Alabama, Missouri, Auburn are all doing it a little bit differently, right? So there is no one concrete model with it. So I think we need to switch the narrative to a business narrative versus an inclusion narrative, and that will yield better results.
Ryan, you've done so much, and boy, I know we could go on and on about this topic for a pretty long time. But you're doing so much to close the gap of understanding and inclusion, and I'd really like to thank you for joining us today. Great words of wisdom. Thanks, Ryan.
I appreciate the time. Thank you, guys.